This series is all about universes, multiverses, planets, worlds and continents and cities. We're delving not into specific games but into the milieus created for them. We'll be looking at where these settings came from, their major features and why you should consider them for your own gaming experiences. This time out, we visit quite a storied world, with a long history, huge influence and unfortunate controversy. It is one of the first designed for role-playing settings ever published, and is, at the same time, one of the most detailed and open milieus ever created. It could be called the mother of all hex crawls, and hosts some of the most celebrated RPG supplements, including the haunted mansion adventure of Tegel's Manor, and the urban legend that is the city-state of the Invincible Overlord. From its birth in print in 1976 to its virtual death by controversy in 2022, we are of course talking about the Wilderlands setting from Judges Guild. The Wilderlands began life as the home Dungeons & Dragons campaign of Bob Bledsaw. He, along with Bill Owen, attempted to get TSR, the company that had originated and was publishing Dungeons & Dragons at the time, interested in publishing materials from that campaign in 1976. Broadly speaking, the folks at TSR did not believe such supplementary materials as campaign settings and adventures were of particular interest as a publishing concern, preferring to focus instead on rule supplements and play aids. But the pair and their newly founded company, Judges Guild, received verbal permission to publish such materials themselves, with use of an approved for use with Dungeons & Dragons and later Advanced Dungeons & Dragons tag, subject to TSR reviewing and approving products ahead of Judges Guild releasing them. Bledsaw and Owen attended Gen Con 9 in 1976 as an unofficial vendor. They had produced a large city map, but could not directly sell it within the premises of the con, and were not allowed to have the map displayed. Instead, when they made a sale, they had to take the customer out to the car park, where they kept a stock of the map in their car. Information about this city was also sold in the form of a subscription to a typed series of initial guidelines booklets. These supplements provided a fairly disorganised info dump of tables and details in each issue, covering non-player characters, buildings within the city, the region beyond the city, crime and punishment, weather guidelines for quests and wishes, and generating wilderness terrain, and more. Eventually, in 1977, all of these booklets were collated into the city-state of the Invincible Overlord, packaged with the large map of that place, and Wilderlands of High Fantasy, packaged with 5 hex grid wilderness maps in both detailed referee and virtually blank player form. The materials included a summary map breaking the city-state campaign world down into 18 mapped regions. The maps were numbered, with Map 1 being that within which the city-state existed, and outlined in a style unique to the various supplements that collected and described them. The Wilderlands of High Fantasy covers Maps 1 through to 5. City-State of the World Empire from 1980 covers a rival urban setting to the Invincible Overlord, and Map 6. Fantastic Wilderlands Beyond from 1979 covers Maps 7 through 10. Wilderlands of the Magic Realm from 1980 covers Maps 11 through to 14, and Wilderlands of the Fantastic Reaches, again from 1980, covers Maps 15 through to 18. Each map depicts a region of the setting with a numbered 5-mile per hex grid. East to west approximately 230 miles, north to south approximately 170 miles. The entire setting, combining all of the maps, is around 670 miles east to west and just over 1,000 miles north to south. This makes it one of the smallest published settings, but that enables a number of uses for it, as we will explore later within the features section. Judges Guild further detailed sections of the Wilderlands settings, in particular Map 1, the map in which the city-state of the Invincible Overlord appears. These supplements and adventures followed the campaign hexagon system, something Judges Guild introduced in 1977. This breaks down a 5-mile campaign hex from the main maps into 0.2 of a mile per hex, and further breaks down the 0.2 of a mile hex into 42.24 feet per hex, using the same hex grid within a hex style. 5 primary supplements were released in this form. The Mines of Kustalkan in 1979, Spies of Light Elf in 1980, and Shield Maidens of Searune, Pirates of Hagrost, and Witches' Court Marshes in 1982. Supplements describing the cities of Modron and Tarantis were also released in 1977 and 1983 respectively, and a smattering of adventures, including the infamous Tegel Manor, called the Wilderlands Home. Judges Guild's Wilderlands products from 1982 onwards carried a Universal Fantasy Supplement tagline, rather than an approval for use with Dungeons & Dragons, as the agreement for that between Judges Guild and TSR ended in that year. While some sporadic releases followed, the company was past the height of its popularity, and it went on hiatus in 1985. In 1987, Mythmere Games, who had gained much popularity through their Roll-Aid series of supplements, acquired a license to the city-state of the Invincible Overlord. I'll only briefly touch on this here, since the opening paragraphs of the work tell the story of Mayfair's version with respect to the subject at hand, that being the Wilderlands setting. The boxed Mayfair edition of the city-state of the Invincible Overlord has taken the original city, revised and replotted the maps of the interior, placed it onto a new continent in a new world, and repopulated the whole. From that alone, you can see that this version of the city-state has nothing to do with the Wilderlands setting, and so we will move quickly on. This version only survived into 1989 in any case. In 1999, Bob Bledsaw made use of the internet to raise Judges Guild from its torpor, selling old warehouse stock online and at conventions, and producing a new printing of the city-state of the Invincible Overlord, an edition from 1983 without the D&D approval flash. This brought the city-state and the Wilderlands back into the public eye somewhat, attracting attention within the D20 license crowd with the advent of the Open Gaming license, in parallel to Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition. Mythmere Games entered into a partnership with Judges Guild, publishing a Player's Guide to the Wilderlands in 2003, a 3.5 edition revision of the city-state of the Invincible Overlord in 2004, and a box set compiling and revising material from the original maps and their supplements, plus other Wilderlands material. For me, this is the definitive. Never before or since have the hexes of the Wilderlands been so detailed as they were in this product. At the time, I opted to buy the PDF rather than the physical copy. I've never seen a physical copy in the UK, and shipping it from elsewhere was untenable. So my version here is those purchased PDFs bound into 2 hardcover volumes. I'm not quite sure if the intent was to continue the line. Necromancer had a fair few claws in various pots, but in any case, the company was parked in 2010, eventually being sold to Frog God Games, a company founded by Bill Webb, following Necromancer's hiatus. Bill being one of the founders of Necromancer and, as you may remember, of Judges Guild, way back in the first place. Bob Bledsaw died in 2008 from cancer. The final Wilderlands product, written by him, was Lost Man's Trail, published by Judges Guild, now under the ownership of Bob's son, Bob Bledsaw II. A handful of final entries remain in the Wilderlands story to date. In 2009, Robert S. Connolly of Bat in the Attic Games produced Supplement 6, after the original Dungeons & Dragons supplements, the Majestic Wilderlands, for use with the Swords and Wizardry D&D Retro Clone game. This would evolve further into the Majestic Fantasy RPG, a Wilderlands-tailored extract of and addition to Swords and Wizardry. In 2014, Goodman Games licensed several Judges Guild products, including the Wilderlands material, to release in hardback compilations. And finally, in 2018, Connolly revised the Wilderlands maps into glorious Technicolor, alongside revisions of the original 4 booklets, High Fantasy, Beyond, Magic Realm, and Fantastic Reaches, folding in an overview of Map 6 into Fantastic Wilderlands Beyond on the way. These maps and booklets make a great companion to the Necromancer edition. Many issues from the original and the Necromancer maps are resolved, and a return to the tabulated information regarding settlements and so on does make it a little bit easier to reference on the fly, even to use as a sort of index reference to the Necromancer work. And then Unfortunate comments and subsequent doubling down on those comments by Bob Bledsaw II in 2020 triggered a number of companies, including Goodman Games, Frog God, Bat in the Attic and DriveThruRPG, to withdraw from their Judges Guild licenses and publications. Since that unfortunate time, the city-state of the Invincible Overlord and the surrounding Wilderlands have been left in the Wilderlands. It is a shame, and while I can and do support the concept of separating an artist's work from their opinions, in this case we're dealing more with the son of the artist wishing to turn profit on his father's legacy. While the Wilderlands has a place in my gaming heart, I can understand and support the position these various companies have taken. While some Judges Guild's products are still alive in one form or another, Dark Tower has recently been released as part of the original Adventures Reincarnated line from Goodman Games, for example. These are instances where the materials have been acquired outright in one way or another. In Dark Tower's case, for example, and the currently running Caverns of Thracia crowdfunding campaign being run by Goodman, that was through their author, General Decay. With the Wilderlands ownership being tied to the ownership of Judges Guild, I do not feel any near-future resurrection of the setting is at hand. Maybe one day we'll be able to tread the wilderness hexes of barbarian Altanis once more, but not today. The Wilderlands, in its original incarnation, comprised 18 5-mile per hex maps, described over 6 products: the city-state of the Invincible Overlord, the city-state of the World Emperor, the Wilderlands of High Fantasy, Fantastic Wilderlands Beyond, Wilderlands of the Magic Realm, and Wilderlands of the Fantastic Reaches. The former 2 products focus on 2 powerful city-states, but also describe the lands around them. The latter 4 provide tables of information regarding settlements, citadels, castles, monstrous lairs, and other locations of note. While these entries give a game master a lot of baseline information to work from, literally hundreds of hexes have 1 or more entries across these tables, the barest minimum of detail is actually provided. For a settlement, for example, you'll be given data on its major trade, general alignment, predominant demographic, broad civilization level, and its ruler's class, level, race and alignment. Lairs simply give the type and number of monsters. The miscellaneous entries, under idyllic isles and ruins and relics sections, provide little more information. A couple of sentences about what can be found at the spot. Certain adventures and additional sources, for example, the village of Tegel is detailed within the Tegel Manor adventure, the city-states of the Invincible Overlord and the World Emperor have their own supplements, as do Modron and Tarantis, plus the 0.2 of a mile hex supplements such as Mines of Cuscalcon. Flesh out these, ending with a mixed patchwork of lightly and heavily detailed portions within the setting. The Necromancer edition provides at least a paragraph for each of these entries, folding in some details from the supplemental sources. Instead of the single-line statistics for settlements, it uses a 3rd edition settlement summary stat block, including trade limits and assets. Encounter areas, lairs, and challenging geography are provided encounter levels to help games masters assess appropriateness for player characters. Rules-wise, the original supplements included tables for determining the nature of ruins, remains, relics, caverns, spirits, and more, generally as extensions to the rules found in the original Dungeons & Dragons rules. The Necromancer edition goes a step further, with the Player's Guide to the Wilderlands providing character options and additions to the D20 rules for running a Wilderlands campaign. With the bulk of the city-state of the Invincible Overlord and the Wilderlands of High Fantasy sets being given over to source material. The Bat in the Attic revision devolves the rules additions, again mainly aimed towards the original Dungeons & Dragons game, especially as revisited within the Swords and Wizardry rules, to the supplements, otherwise covering a smaller number of settlements and lairs, Wilderlands of the Magic Realm and Wilderlands of the Fantastic Reaches. The purpose of all of this, play aid rules and hex-by-hex exploration of settlements, citadels, castles, lairs and interesting locations, is to provide games masters with an array of seeds upon which they can build as the player characters explore the setting. The almost blank player maps are a key to this, and were unfortunately not repeated in the Necromancer and Bat in the Attic versions, as they illustrated famous landmarks that player characters might reasonably have heard about and know roughly where they were, but detailed none of the hexes in between. It was down to the characters then to explore, seek out adventure, and figure out their own goals in order to drive the narrative of the game. It wasn't a setting particularly designed for a games master to derive a story and have players move their characters through that, although of course that style of play is possible here. Nor was it a setting given to describing minutiae to the games master, even within the supplements expanding on particular areas. The games master is left to interpret the information the books provide in whatever way he or she likes, often following the unfolding shape the players are taking for the game. In this way, the games master reacts to player character goals and actions using the summary information provided to spark his or her own imagination. Setting, player characters, players, and games master thus collaborate and evolve the game together. So let's break down a few examples of the entries to give you a feel for the sort of information you get. I'll show and tell comparisons across the three major versions, the original, Necromancer and Bat in the Attic, so you'll have a reference to go on. First, a settlement, Omen, which exists in Hex 1815 of Map 1. Omen has been an able-bodied population of 236 and has a civilization level of 2, a tribal centre, mainly agricultural, led by a chief. The able-bodied population defaults to around 1/4 of a settlement's population, but this is left for the referee to play with as he sees fit. The peoples are, on average, inclined towards lawful good, and their leader is Banfort, a 9th-level chaotic good dwarven fighter. Principal trade is in gold, and this is as much as the original booklets have to say about the place. The Necromancer source expands, adding in settlement statistics from the 3rd edition Dungeon Master's Guide. Tech level of 5 indicates that the place is capable of producing moderate level medieval tech. We get a specific population of 944, 4 times the original listed 236, encompassing those 236 able-bodied individuals. A racial cultural breakdown is provided along the lines of the 3rd edition settlement stats, so we can see that the population is 37% human, 20% dwarf, 18% halfling, 10% elf, 7% gnome, and the remaining a mixture of others. Along with Banfort, we are also given 2 additional figures. Bandar, a neutral ranger fighter, who captains 2 ranger companies totaling 40 low-level rangers, who patrol the region around the village, and Larissi, a neutral rogue, who heads up a smuggling operation amongst the villagers' gold miners. A description of the village is provided, stating that Omen's mines are jointly operated by the city-state of the Invincible Overlord and the city of Thunderhold, and Banfort is from the latter. It also hints that the goblins from the village of Hledra in Hex 1715 are known threats in the wilds. From the Bat in the Attic revision, we return to the one-line summary of 236 predominantly lawful good humans led by Banfort. So that's a settlement. Around 45 miles to the south of Omen stands a tower in Hex 1824. The original sources describe this as being a citadel, inhabited by a 5th-level neutral magic user with 40 men-at-arms for protection. The Necromancer source expands this location out a lot. Here we are given that is the Tower of Keystone's Shadow, and its statistics are expanded out to use the 3rd edition settlement block. Our population of 40 men-at-arms is now swelled to include 120 commoners, serving a lawful neutral 9th-level wizard, Alran, although the population does not speak his name. He is aided by Indigo the Questor, a neutral halfling rogue sorcerer with a knack for finding planar portals. We are told that the tower's name comes from it sitting in the shadow of a mountain, Keystone Peak. Legends surrounding Keystone say that a master key for all of the planar portals in the Wilderlands exists somewhere near, and Alyan and Indigo have dedicated their research into finding it and uncovering further secrets of the tower in which they live, which they have not yet fully explored after taking it over from a long-vanished wizard. Once more, the revision simply presents the information provided in the original. A Yeti lair, somewhere in Hex 1807, about 40 miles north of Omen, near the village of Crucible in the foothills of the Majestic Mountains. In the original and the revised version, we are told that there are 4 of them. In the Necromancer source, we are informed that the 4 Yeti comprise an encounter level 8 encounter and live in a cave near Crucible. They tend to leave people alone if left alone, but have also been known to guide lost travellers through their land from a distance, and to rain avalanches upon orcs who dare enter it. And a final example is in Hex 1901, the Isle of Empedocles, where a castaway pirate lives who fears the return of a giant crocodile which hates him. That may sound familiar to some people, and there are similar references and puns littered throughout the Wilderlands source material that may bring a wry smile of recognition or a groan of exasperation, depending on your own receptiveness to such things and sense of humour. The Bat in the Attic revision repeats the information about the castaway. Perhaps, unsurprisingly at this point, the Necromancer source expands on this, giving us an encounter level of 5, 7 or 8 for the island, and providing a summary stat block and name, Bligh, for the pirate. We are also told some of his backstory, that his ship was damaged in a storm and sank, and he was the only survivor, and that the giant crocodile, in this case, is a fiendish giant crocodile named Moby, that is the only other inhabitant of the island. Bligh and Moby having been engaged in a personal feud, and the pirate believes that the crocodile has discovered some ancient evil on the island that it is using to bolster its own power. So from these comparisons, you can see just how much the Necromancer version of Wilderlands expands on the very slim summary detail provided in the original and repeated in the Bat in the Attic revisions. Alongside this, Necromancer released a player's guide, which even further increases the detail available when playing in the setting. Races, cultures, classes, spells, monsters, and everything else that you would expect from a setting guidebook. Similarly, the City-State of the Invincible Overlord volume from the Necromancer set very much expands from the Judges Guild original. Whether the short summaries or the more expansive descriptions found in the Necromancer works is best is entirely subjective, and depends very much on what an individual referee wants to do with the setting, how much of their own stamp they wish to make, and how much of a blank slate they want to start their games with. Personally, I prefer to use the Wilderlands in a blank slate form, primarily using the short summaries, but using the Necromancer entries as a resource of ideas, occasionally pulling entries in wholesale where they fit with the narrative that the players are constructing in their explorations. As was normal for the day, the Wilderlands blur science fiction and fantasy. Modern gamers may find this odd, as the boundaries between the two broad genres are very much more solid than they once were. Consider, for example, one of the most beloved fantasy novels, The Swords of Lankhmar, the most epic of Fritz Lieber's works regarding Fafard and the Grey Mouser. While the bulk of the novel is of swords and sorcery fare, the presence of DriveThruRPG, a traveller of space and dimensions who collects creatures from various worlds for a zoo, is a brief encounter that illustrates the blurred boundary point. The Truehertz encounter would not feel out of place at all within the Wilderlands, and there is potential scope for mixing high-tech and magic within a campaign. It also evokes the older form of Dungeons & Dragons, a more freewheeling approach to the game, breaking even against the first edition of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. While Necromancer did a fair attempt at bridging the more structured rules of the D20 system and the old-school nature of the Wilderlands, I think the Wilderlands does work best when used with the lighter touch of those earlier rules. It works well in this regard, with the original D&D rules and its derivatives such as Sword and Wizardry, and other games of a similar complexity such as Basic Dungeons & Dragons and its derivatives, Black Hack, Fighting Fantasy, and Tunnels and Trolls. It could work with basic role-playing too. It can, of course, work perfectly fine with a more structured game such as Advanced Dungeons & Dragons and later editions from 3rd edition on, suited to the points of light concept built into the assumption of 4th edition, and Rollmaster, but I feel that the detail needed by these games takes something out of the almost ad hoc manner in which exploration by players and the collaborative colouring between the outline, building as we go concept the setting lends itself best to. I think the Wilderlands calls to gamers of a particular vintage and mindset. Players familiar with more modern concepts of fantasy and fantasy gaming may well be confused by some of the older ideas, both in gaming and the previously mentioned blurring of lines between fantasy and science fiction, that the setting presents. Where it works best is as a framework with a scattered level of detail upon which a Wilderlands suited to a particular gaming group can be moulded to their personal tastes. If that sort of thing is for you, then yes, there is nothing else quite like the Wilderlands along that concept. If, however, you prefer a richer setting with its own stories and lore, perhaps the Necromancer version of the Wilderlands will scratch that itch. But for me, that version feels more like someone else having run a traditional Wilderlands campaign and then documented it. For me, the concept of the Wilderlands informed many of the tricks and tools that I've used over the years when building and running my own world. The maps, the simple details, the collaborative construction of a world during play are all things that have worked well for me. While I rarely run the Wilderlands itself, a lot of the way that I run games is informed by it. So I can say that it is for me, but I can understand why it wouldn't necessarily be for others. I would recommend hunting down second-hand copies of whatever edition I have piqued your interest on during this video essay, although the Necromancer ones are hard to find and pricey. The point of view of the custodian works of Judges Guild does not take away from the worth of the material the company released during its time in the sun, and it is such a shame that for now the Wilderlands are somewhat lost to us.